Joining us today is a person you may already know. Last year, she ran as the Democratic candidate for the newly redrawn 15th Congressional District, which spans from the Valley up to 81 and around the east side of San Antonio, ending near New Braunfels. Please welcome Michelle Vallejo. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start with a little bit about yourself. Tell the folks at home what it is you're all about.
Yeah, so I'm a community member that grew up here, in particular Alton, Texas. I'm a small business owner. Grew up in my family-owned business, which is Pulga Los Portales, where I've seen firsthand how hard it is for people to make ends meet. Very hardworking families and very hardworking entrepreneurs are just scraping by. And so I've jumped into this race once again in order to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to achieve their American dream.
You know, one of the things you just talked about was seeing folks struggle on a regular basis out there at your family-owned business. We know the average salary in the Rio Grande Valley is about $41,000, give or take. After inflation, that's worth about the same as $25,000 20 years ago, back in 2003. Now, one of the things that you talk about on your website is about wages staying stagnant as costs continue to climb. Talking about that, what do you propose would make it so people working full-time jobs, some of these folks even with multiple full-time jobs and part-time jobs, what do you suggest Congress can do to make ends meet for these folks as inflation grows?
Yeah, one thing that we could do is tie wages to inflation to make sure that when costs rise, that doesn't mean that they're not able to keep a roof over their head or just make their very basic ends meet. And this is one thing that I'm fighting for. I'm also making sure that I'm an advocate for small businesses. So as a small business owner and someone who serves other small businesses in our community, it's something that's very near and dear to my heart to make sure that they have every opportunity possible in order to achieve their American dream. But it's also important to make sure that we have other programs in place. And one thing in particular is also to make sure that people are able to afford medical care and have everything that they need to stay healthy at every stage of their life. It's far too common that people are forced to have to go to Mexico to be able to afford medication and just very basic medical care. And it's very unfortunate that so many families are just one trip away to the hospital from filing bankruptcy and going into debt. And these are the changes that Congress needs to be prioritizing right now. And I do want to say that it's very unfortunate that our current sitting member, Monica de la Cruz, is willing to sacrifice these needs and doesn't put the people of South Texas first. Rather, she is towing a party line and stays distracted from the priorities that the families of South Texas really have.
You know, speaking of some of the things you were just talking about, like health care, we know that the big news right now is the debt ceiling bill. It came from the president and the House Speaker, and it's getting a lot of pushback, not from just one side, but both parties, really. A lot of progressive Democrats are speaking out against it. As a progressive candidate yourself, what are your thoughts on this bill?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that before anything, I'm a champion of the people. That's what I'm going to stay focused on. I do not want to get distracted by any labels, by the progressive label. I want to reassure the people of South Texas that I'm here to fight for us first, above all else. And when it comes to the debt ceiling, what I've seen is that it is very shameful, in particular, that the Republican Party in the House has decided to gamble with the lives of South Texans and of the people of this country. Once more, I will highlight that Monica de la Cruz is willing to jeopardize veteran services, funding for public schools, as well as Medicare and Social Security. And we know that if we do not reach an agreement, the people who are the most unfortunate and most marginalized in our communities will feel the brunt of these consequences first.
Something you just mentioned there was the Republicans almost wanting to get rid of services like Medicaid or veteran services. You know, staying on the topic of things like Medicaid, a lot of folks are saying in the Democratic Party, no cuts should be made to any of these services. Do you agree with that, or do you think we should actually be expanding on these services to kind of achieve that goal of helping folks here, especially in the Valley?
I do agree with that. I do think that we should be expanding, for example, retirement resources, especially for our teachers and folks who have been working their entire lives. Also expanding Medicare coverage, possibly bumping it up to the age of 50 to make sure that we catch people before they end up in very dire situations that are very costly and severely decrease quality of life, not just for that individual, but for their entire family. And I think we should make sure that those who are making the most money in this country are those who are held accountable for making sure that they're paying their fair share.
Tell me a little bit more about what you had mentioned about raising wages and making sure things like that are in line with inflation.
Yeah, so there are other ways that we could combat this. For example, lowering taxes for small business owners, also lowering taxes for property owners and those who are carrying the brunt of the expenses here in South Texas. That is my priority every step of the way, and that's what I'm going to stay focused on.
It's moving along here. When it does come to taxes, you know, some of that revenue, if we give tax breaks to these small businesses, the folks here in South Texas, some of that revenue needs to be made up. Are you proposing anything else tax-wise when it comes to making up that revenue?
So I believe that we must be fiscally responsible every step of the way, but the hardworking people of South Texas should not be carrying the brunt of this. We need to see some of the highest earners in this country being held accountable to pay their fair share. This is the 1%, this is the billionaire class, which are very few, if none, here in South Texas. So we need to make sure that people across this country are being held accountable and that the people who are working the hardest are not left without resources and that safety net. I myself am someone who have been able to benefit from opportunities throughout my lifetime with my education and my career opportunities, as well as being able to be a part of my family business and give back to my community. That is me achieving the American dream. And I'm in this fight to make sure that others are able to achieve their American dream. Su sueño americano. So when it comes to, you know, holding that 1%, that top class of earners accountable, so many folks think that when they hear high taxes for high income earners, that's going to apply to them, but so often that is not the case. So what do you think is the message to folks at home that might be thinking like, oh, well, you know, I earn way more than the average person here in the Rio Grande Valley. She's coming after my money. What's the message to that person? Yeah, the message to them is that I'm in this fight for them as well. I want them to achieve every opportunity that's available for them. I believe that if you're hardworking and you have the best interest of your family, you should be protected every step of the way. And I know that every single person in South Texas and throughout District 15 deserves that. And that's why I'm jumping into this race, because I am that champion and I will be that advocate for every single hardworking family, every single hardworking person of our district and of our home region. I will make sure that we are fighting and achieving the goal of having better high-paying jobs and jobs that provide opportunities for growth, and to make sure that our children and those who are learning skills and learning their trade here in our region have those opportunities here without having to leave our region. As many know, we experience this phenomenon known as brain drain, where some of our brightest minds are swept away from this region because they don't have those opportunities. I want to see families making more money. I want to see individuals reaching higher tax brackets, but at the same time, I don't want them to be crushed because they are achieving new heights. Turning now to immigration, the end of Title 42, all eyes across the world were on the Rio Grande Valley at the time. Not just here, but from here all the way, you know, to the border in California. And we now know that this so-called surge seemingly disappeared overnight once Title 8 became the only enforcement measure. But one thing that's still happening since then in the last couple weeks is traffickers are still being caught. We've seen this all across the Texas border for sure. Governor Abbott has called on other states to send state troopers and National Guard troops. Stopping trafficking, both of people and drugs, is one of your key points on your immigration page on your website. What is your plan to make sure that we can get the state out of this and make sure the federal authorities we have on the border get what they need to combat trafficking? Yeah, so I've been in conversation with our members of our Border Patrol, also of our National Guard, and what's being done is not enough. Something that we've experienced here in the region of South Texas is that the issue on immigration has been highly politicized, used as a wedge issue for members of different political parties. And I do want to highlight once again that Monica de la Cruz is using this issue as a part of her campaign platform to be divisive and in order to achieve political personal gain. And I will be the first one to say that not enough is being done for our home region, especially when it comes to resourcing our border and making sure that everybody who's responsible for maintaining a secure border and maintaining a home that is safe and also humane when receiving asylum seekers in a timely and a safe way, and removing those threats such as traffickers. These have to be our priorities, and we need to make sure that someone is in Congress who's able to work in a bipartisan way to make sure that our voices and our experiences are considered and prioritized when making decisions on a more comprehensive immigration reform.
We'll talk a little more about the asylum process in a moment, but something you mentioned was someone going there and being bipartisan, something that works for both parties and works for everyone, especially here in the Valley, when it comes to legislation on the border. We know it's cartels running those trafficking routes, typically, both the drugs and the people. The state has already labeled cartels as terrorist organizations, and now there's a small kind of movement in the Democratic Party to start maybe thinking about labeling these groups as terrorist organizations. We know that that would open up a whole different pot of money for border security. Have you given any thought to the idea of a federal terrorist designation for cartels in Mexico?
You know, my priority is making sure that we have all the resources, and we are going to have to be creative in being able to accomplish this. And I am very much highly considering that because we do need more help and we do need more resources. But what I do want to emphasize is that we are not in a situation where we could afford another Band-Aid approach solution to the immigration situation that we are facing right now. We are a border region. We will always be a border region. It's something that I will always say makes us beautiful and unique and worthy of being an American pride, being a place of an example that we could be not just for the country but for the entire world, of being a border region that is humane, is friendly, that is thriving based on the innovation and based on the fusion of the ideas that I know crosses our paths here. So I'm very excited to get to Congress and be able to figure out what we have to do specifically in order to open up more resources and make sure that we have the manpower here at the border to face this challenge.
You know, one of the things you just mentioned was a humane process here in our border, not being like some of the other countries we see around the world in a border region. As far as the asylum process, there are people out there who are getting court dates way down the road. We're seeing some sources reporting up to 10 years from now, and these are folks that have just come over in the last month, 2 months. We know it's not fair to Americans, and it's also not fair to these asylum seekers because oftentimes, you know, they could get a parking ticket or something, and next thing you know, they're getting deported and they've been here for 9 years or whatever it may be. What do you think is the fix, or one thing that you think would be a big step towards fixing the asylum process here at the border?
Yeah, so one thing immediately that comes to mind is making sure that our immigration courts are properly functioning and that they're able to expedite the overwhelming situation of people who are on the backlogs. I will mention that Title 42 was a Band-Aid approach to immigration and to receiving asylum seekers right here at the doorstep of our country. And now we're seeing that we are feeling those consequences, and it is Americans, it is our community members, it is our local cities and governments that are trying to figure out a way to manage this problem. But I will say that if we are able to resource our immigration courts and have more immigration lawyers and folks in the judicial process that have everything they need, I think we could see some alleviation to this problem.
And one final question. I know this is something I've seen you campaign on. It's something that's a big part of your website, DACA, a major part of your campaign. The fight over DACA has been going on for years. As you said earlier, it's almost been used as the political football when it comes to immigration within our borders versus immigration coming over our borders. How do you make this palatable for both sides of the aisle?
Right, so DACA recipients are children who came to our country without any knowledge of their own. For many, this is the country, the only country that they know. And they have been learning, they have been preparing to be a part of our workforce and to be fully integrated into our communities as people who will give back to our country, who will give back to our local communities. And I believe that it is only fair to provide them a pathway to citizenship without having them be caught in a limbo situation due to political games.
All right, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate your time. Michelle Vallejo, candidate for the 15th Congressional District in Texas, joining us. We'll have this full interview on krgv.com.